Welcome to the G-Spot.
Five, four, three, two, one.
Hello everybody and welcome to Dynamic GT League's G-Spot. It's going to be a long one today, folks. Now, for anyone that doesn't know what the Dynamic GT League G-Spot is, basically where we get to look at the weird and wonderful things that happen in the Dynamic GT League, and on occasions if reports are put in or clarifications are requested, this is a platform where we can show the reasonings for either penalties being given, not given, or showing a clarification on things. And sometimes it's just for looking at the funny stuff that happens in DGT League. This one today, though, I will say as well, normally I would have Ray joining me on the G-Spots. However, just the way the course of this current championship has gone and timing of my own personal life, hasn't given us the time to get on and do it. Because normally what we would do is we would record commentary and then straight after record the G-Spot. And that's why sometimes the G-Spot shows stuff from the previous week, not the stuff from that weekend, because it's difficult to get all the footage edited together and get it put out there. Obviously, for this week, things are a bit different, because more than likely the G-Spot's going to be out before the race video is going to be out, but that's because I've been away at the weekend. And so the race video is coming out, at least 3 days late. And the G-Spot's late as well. Now, obviously, you'll notice on the screen there is a number of things for us to have a look at. So, as I mentioned, this is going to be a long one. But also, because it's a long one, but it should be an informative one. And it has just reminded me, actually, there is something that I haven't yet put together, but I'm going to do that in a moment, and I will actually put it in before we go actually looking into the incidents. Basically, it's what was written at the start of the steward's report, because the steward's report is a long one. What is written at the start of the steward's report is a very, very good piece of information. Now, something that I will mention just before I do that is that yes, this has been a very long process and have been extenuating circumstances, i.e. me being away and SGP being away. But also, there's been a lot for us to deal with, so it has taken some time. And with us also having dealt with the boost test that we did recently and getting all the information for that out, and if you haven't seen that, go see that. It's very worth watching. Very informative. Explains everything you should need to know about the boost and all that lot. So with having done that, and there's a lot of stuff we did with that, and then having dealt with all of these as well, it has become quite time consuming. Now, yes, we have said we want drivers to send in reports if they see things that they do not feel is right, or if people have done things wrong, i.e. hitting somebody off the track and not waiting for them. We want you to report those things, so don't feel bad for us in terms of if it takes us a while to get through dealing with crashes and stuff like that. We will deal with those without any argument, other than we may say, come on guys, you've got to be doing better and avoiding these contacts. What has occurred with this particular one, though, is it has brought in situations with track limits. And obviously, at the start of this championship, we began with having the in-game track limits penalties on. And as admins, we chose to take them off because there was the possibility that somebody could get hit off the track and receive a penalty, and the knock-on effect of that. one thing I can tell you is that us as admins have been discussing or rediscussing that situation with the track limits penalties, because dealing with track limits is never a nice thing to have to do, and it can be very time consuming. And as admins and as stewards, I mean, we don't want to be giving anybody penalties, and we don't like telling people they've got penalties, and we don't like having to deal with people that are angry that they've got penalties, and we don't want people to be getting angry at all, but sometimes that's going to happen. But for us, one of the things that we want to do is keep things as simple as possible, and the discussion is being had of do we bring back the corner cut penalties and deal with any incidents that may occur with that, and then we don't have to deal with any track limits situations, or do we not bring it back to avoid having those situations that could occur, but means we then physically have to deal with any track limits situations that are brought to us. And it's a very in-depth discussion, and we've said since we come into GT7 that even though we are now on GT7, it is still a work in progress as to what may work best for us as a group, as admins, as drivers, as friends, and it's why on the race video that you'll perhaps hear a little later if you haven't heard it yet, at the very end, I do ask if anybody has any ideas of how we could put the stewarding information out, or how we could give that information to the drivers. If you've got any ideas of how we could perhaps do that differently, or do it better, feel free to let us know your ideas, because you may have ideas that we don't have. But yeah, the corner cut penalty is one that is in discussion. It may be reapplied for this upcoming race, it may not be. We will have to wait and see what we actually decide. Okay, I'm now going to add in the bit that I forgot to add in that's on the start of the stewards report, and then we're going to crack on going through all of the stuff on this G-Spot. Now, as I've mentioned, there is a lot to go through here, and I will try and do it as quickly as I can, for your benefit and mine. So let's get cracking. The stewards forward. Get your beer and popcorn ready, lads. This is a long one. If any of the drivers have any concerns over anything in the report, it's important that they message the page directly and not put complaints in the main DGT chat or criticise people for putting reports in. The stewards process is there to help drivers learn from mistakes, and no driver is ever purposely singled out. Okay, and now that I have covered that piece, I think there's only one more thing to do, and that is to let's get into the nitty gritty of the DGT-G-SPOT 37. G1, race 4, Dave for the win. Okay, so the report here is from SGP, which says Dave the Harp ETL was lap 16 at 35 minutes on the footage, gets a run on SGP to fight in the lead in the following corners, taking first place at 36 minutes on the footage. Fair? Question mark. If penalties was on, he would have had to serve a penalty, giving SGP the win. Okay, the stewards say Dave clearly cuts the corner on the exit of the chicane and gains an advantage. From reviewing the footage, it appears he gains 0.2 seconds on SGP by doing so, helping him slipstream and draw alongside. Don't know what he's drawing for, but he got alongside. SGP remains in front at turn 1, but then runs wide as he defends again into turn 2 and loses the lead. It should be noted that even though the game would have forced Dave to serve a penalty had track limits penalties been turned on, it doesn't mean that under DGT rules, Dave should automatically be given a penalty. It also should be pointed out that Dave may not have been aware he cut the corner from his driving view. More information can be found in the additional section later on in this report and G-Spot. The stewards feel after gaining an advantage, Dave should not have drawn alongside SGP. Because Dave didn't complete the overtake until turn 2, the stewards were initially unsure if this deserved a penalty, as there is no previous precedent for what happens in subsequent corners. However, the stewards agreed that Dave would not have been close enough to attempt the overtake into turn 2 without cutting the chicane and drawing alongside SGP before turn 1. The steward's verdict then is that it's a stage 1 penalty to Dave for an unfair overtake, which is -2 points. And we are going to have a look at the footage of this, but one of the things that I want to mention just before we do is that with Dave the Harp getting up alongside after the chicane, and with SGP defending, it has an effect all the way down to turn 1 and turn 2. So the fact that the overtake happens and the nature of the overtake that happens in turn 2 in this situation is all connected. It's all the one same piece of situation. Okay, let's take a look at the footage then. Okay, so we're going to take a look on sort of spectate view. It's a different angle, I think, from what we saw on the race video. But the first thing we're going to do is ascertain whether there was a cut or not. Now, from this view, it's difficult to tell. From this view, it is also difficult to tell. So it's possible that Dave had no idea that there was any wrongdoing here at all. I say wrongdoing. It's possible Dave may not have known that the corner was cut. Was the corner cut? Well, this is what we're going to just check now. So, although the other two camera angles look like it may not have been or may have been close, we can see here that Dave is 4 wheels off the track over the white line before the yellow curb. So this is an ETL. This is exceeding track limits. If it was curb all the way through and underneath where Dave's car was, it wouldn't be under the DGT rules, but it's over the white line. There is no curb there. Unfortunately for Dave, that is a cut. So we're going to see the full extent of the footage here, and you can tell there again it is a cut. Easy to tell from this view, harder from the other. Now, Dave appears to not be in SGP slipstream initially, but then does drop down into it, and this is a key part of it. With the cut, it does allow Dave to get that little bit closer, which gets him into the slipstream, and this is where Dave now draws alongside. And I think if Dave had known that he'd cut the corner, I don't think he would have pulled up alongside. However, he has done, and he shouldn't do. So everything that happens here then is a situation of, well, Dave shouldn't be in this position. He does take the lead momentarily, and SGP retakes the lead. Now, some may say, well, SGP stayed ahead, what's the problem? Well, it's the distance between the two cars. The only reason the cars are this close now is because of everything that's just happened. SGP goes defensive because of how close Dave is. SGP does have a little moment of going deep, and that's when Dave makes the overtake. Some may say, well, what's the problem with that? SGP messed up. Well, we're going to look at the previous lap where the gaps are fairly similar. Neither driver cut the corner, but Dave is just that little bit further back on this occasion. He's not quite getting the slipstream. He's not close enough to get the slipstream. And the difference between those two situations is about 0.2 of a second. So if we watch now, so this is sort of around about the situation where Dave's car should or could have been. Now, let's say, for example, had Dave not attempted an overtake or anything like that down into turn 1 because he'd gained an advantage down the straight and then made the overtake at turn 2, it would have been a different conversation. So on this occasion, yes, he gets closer here. SGP even goes a little deep. Dave goes a little less deep. The gap is bigger than we saw on the previous clip. SGP doesn't have to defend because Dave isn't close enough, and SGP misses the apex a bit. Dave closes the gap a little bit, but we don't feel that had that distance of the cars been there in the previous lap shown where David made the pass, if SGP had the moment of going deep all on his own, We don't feel Dave would have been close enough to make the move. But it boils down to, unfortunately for Dave, he did cut the corner. We're fully aware that he may not have known he'd cut the corner, and we will go into that a little more later on. Not just about Dave either, it's about the corner cutting. He shouldn't have got up alongside, and he did get up alongside. Because he did get up alongside, that meant that SGP had to defend and was offline into turn 1. That affected both drivers going through that corner, which then affected both drivers heading up to turn 2. SGP having to defend in turn 2, when really the only reason he's having to defend is because David got alongside and had an effect in turn 1. So unfortunately for Dave, it is a -2 point penalty for completing the overtake from gaining an advantage from cutting the corner. But we fully appreciate that Dave may have had no idea that he'd done that. And one of the reasons we say that is, I know, for example, and so do a couple of the others, we know that Dave was one person that wanted the corner cut penalties on in this race. So it's unfortunate for Dave that he's been caught by this. But yeah, so Dave, if you're angry, I'm sorry, but unfortunately, you've got unlucky there, you've cut the corner. Now, I will say, I personally did have a look through all of Dave's footage just out of curiosity, and Dave literally only goes off the track there once. I think maybe twice. But that's like minimal, and there's only one time that he gains anything from it. So for Dave, it's really, really unlucky in that situation. But as stewards, we didn't feel like we couldn't apply any kind of penalty to it. Okay, so sorry, Dave, don't shoot us or beat us up or anything like that. And don't spend all your money in Wales that you've just won. And it wasn't for the race when it was for Facebook gambling, basically. Right, okay, so that one done. Let's move on to the next one, shall we? G2, admins assemble, and drivers aware. This was actually brought in by SGP for the attention of the admins. It's Art Powell versus Gary. Wants the admins to discuss. Well, we sort of looked at it as stewards. Gary and Art Powell are side by side, and Gary appears to try and pull up from the slipstream. Pull out from the slipstream of the car in front, which resulted in making minor contact with Art Powell, with no driver really impacted. So, as far as any stewarding is concerned, there's no further action, but SGP wanted to bring this to everybody's attention, just to highlight. Again, these are those situations where if you're going to move across the track, you need to make sure there's nobody next to you, because these are kind of like, many of these tiny little things can have a big effect towards people, and this isn't a picking on Gary either. This is for everybody. Like, you could be doing it to others and not really knowing, so please be aware. So coming out of the inner sector onto the first real banking bit, Gary gets a good run alongside Art Powell, gets up behind Bob. And then there's a small moment where Gary just goes up the track a little bit and then comes back down into Bob's slipstream, but also looks at getting past Bob. And now what I would recommend is, in that situation, the best thing he could have done actually would have been to just continue bump drafting Bob, and he would have got ahead of Art Powell. So we'll look at it from this view, and again, this is only a very, very small moment, which may not seem like much, but it's when these things build up. So no problem with Gary getting up alongside Art Powell at all. Art Powell just giving him the room, and then Gary's car is just going to drift up the track a little bit. Now, you may not have known there was any contact there, but it's one of those where if you're going to drift up the track, you've got to make sure there isn't a car there, because in this situation, and it could be any two drivers here, the guy on the outside may feel the contact or see the contact and wonder what you're doing, and think you may be going for the gap. And I think that may be why SGP has brought it to our attention, because it may look like Gary's going for the gap there. We don't know for certain, but what we do know for certain is, if you are going to pull out from behind a car and you're going to move across the road, you do need to make sure there isn't a car next to you when you do it. Okay, that's pretty much it on that one. So let's crack on with the next one. G3, push to pass. Okay, so this was actually brought in to us by SRI and Art Powers, two separate situations that's the same one. So SRI, lap 5, Conrad looks like a push to pass as he hit my rear. I hit Demon R, that then causes more drivers to take evasive action and more cars go off. Art Powell put 936, a lot going on here. There was a collision ahead of me, so there was cars ahead of me. Excuse me, I tried my best to get in the gap that opened up because of the collision and to avoid T-boning anyone. After I got through, I lost the back end and ended up hitting Ray. Only after looking back at the replay and in slow motion, I think I should have waited for Ray, as it could be interpreted I had control of the car and then lost it. At the time, I considered it all part of the same incident that started by the earlier collision that I didn't cause. So as I mentioned, this is two different situations, but it's part of the same one. So SRI saying he's been there's contact from from Conrad that causes a collision, and Art Powell talking about him getting caught up within that collision and wondering if it was his that secondary part was his fault. So we'll have a look at what the stewards say, and then we'll have a look at the footage. Okay, the steward's view. Ray has a look up the inside of Demon R, with Connor braking even later behind and making contact with Ray. This results in both Ray and Demon R being pushed wide, and there is then further contact from Art Powell behind that causes Ray to spin. In the steward's view, Connor was not within fair range to make an overtake on Ray. The move is too late, and it should have been obvious to Connor that he needed to wait for Ray afterwards. Not waiting when it's clear you are at fault can annoy other drivers. As for what happened afterwards, Art Powell was not to blame. This was just a chain reaction caused by Connor hitting Ray initially. So the steward's verdict on that is a stage 2 penalty to Connor for causing a collision, which is -3 points. And we will have a look at the footage so that everybody can be aware of what happened and we can all try and learn from it. So we're going to take a look initially on the spectate view, and we see Demon R behind Steve F1. Steve F1's gone wide. Don't do commentary, Dave. That's not what we're here for. So we've got Steve F1, Demon R, then SRI, Conrad, and Art Powell, fairly close together. And we can see, so we can't see a lot from this view other than 3 cars look like they got very close, and then as it progresses on, here's Art Powell's moment of going sideways, which collected Ray, and then someone else got in there as well. Okay, so from Demon R's view, kind of half looking, half defending, and then it would appear Ray come up the inside, and then we saw there was a little bit of contact and goes wide, and there's Art Powell. So let's have a look from Ray's view. So for the stewards here, well, Ray goes for the move, which could have been a little late on Demon R, but Ray does seem to wait for Demon R there, maybe, I don't know, but he's behind him. But if Ray's move was maybe a little late, then maybe that helps with the Connor decision. So Conrad here is a bit further back than SRI and is a bit late on the brakes. Does make contact with SRI, which pushes both SRI and Demon R wide. And then Conrad continues on. Demon R stays ahead, but unfortunately SRI isn't there. Art Powell going very wide. You can see from here, Conrad does get on those brakes a little late, contact with both of them. Art Powell goes for the gap, nothing wrong with that, does lose control of the car and just tags Ray that tiny bit, and then Bob goes, yeah! So it's all Bob's fault. But okay, so we're going to have a look here now in slow motion. So this is where, for the stewards, is Connor's move a little too late? And the answer for us is yes. He already starts moving his car across. Could be looking, could be defending. We don't know, but what we do know is he does get on the brakes a little bit too late. SRI, maybe a touch late on Demon R, is already sort of moving into the space that Connor may have been looking at. But if SRI's move may have been a touch too late, then Conrad's move is definitely way late, because look at how close he's got to Demon R, for example, but does make contact with SRI here. Without that contact, SRI and Demon R could have sorted out what was going to happen in that corner. But that contact from Connor does send both cars way off the apex. So this is where that contact, Conrad should now get ready to wait for SRI. So we'll look here. So this is SRI's view, having a look at Demon R. So he goes to have a look up the inside, and I think maybe realises it's a touch late. Demon R's heading into the corner already, and this is potentially a little bit too late. There's a little bit of space there, but it's always going to disappear, and there is a little bit of contact. But this is one of those situations where this bit of contact between Demon R and SRI is for them to sort out, but the secondary contact has already happened, which pushes both of these cars wider. SRI here ends up behind Demon R, so that would be SRI and Demon R dealt with. And we'll look at that again at full speed. Now you can't really necessarily see there the contact, but we know that it's already happened. And SRI continues to get going and then gets tagged by the spinning art pal. The thing is though, Connor should have been waiting already for SRI on this one. So we can see from this view again, Connor's too late on the brakes, tags the both of them. Art pal taking evasive, goes for the gap, loses the rear, so easily done there, and we don't put blame on him for that because he's evading a collision that's happened ahead and lost control of the car. And for Bob, well, yeah, you'd think he can't get involved in this, surely. He thinks about having a look at Jason, doesn't go for it. And then what happens here is he sees Art Pal spin, he thinks, oh yeah, I've missed it, cool, and then Ray goes, no you ain't, and there you go. So, as I mentioned, as far as the stewards are concerned in that situation, because Conrad made contact with SRI, which sent both SRI and Demon R deep into the corner, Conrad should have been waiting for SRI. The fact that SRI then got spun and took out shouldn't change the fact there that Conrad should still be waiting for SRI. Because once that contact has happened, the immediate aftermath of that is directly connected to the fact that there's been the contact which has sent SRI offline. Now, if it had been that SRI had a little bit of bumpy with Demon R, and they got through the corner and SRI waited, and then there was all that carnage happen afterwards, that's a completely different scenario. But this is one of the things that's said with the stewarding is this is the kind of incident where as a driver you really should know that you've had contact with the car ahead and that you should be waiting for them, and that's why in this situation Connor does get a penalty for this, because there has been contact. It is too late to attempt making the move there, and it does result in a penalty that in this situation it's deserving because Conrad should have waited for SRI. Okay, right, let's move on to the next one. G4, Gary's face plant. Okay, report here. This is from SRI and Art Pal. Art Pal put during the race Gary waited. He didn't have much choice as he face planted the wall. So this is just reported for awareness. Also a lot during the race, I'm not sure as drivers we were giving each other enough space, and SRI brought this to the admin's attention as well, to be pointed out for awareness, and it's quite an important one this, I would say. So we'll have a look at what the steward's saying. Gary is alongside Bob as the cars enter the banking, and Art Pal then moves up the inside, which the stewards believe he did fairly. There is minor contact after the three cars merge into each other, and it's understandable that with Gary being on the outside he may not have known there were two cars to his left. However, after the cars separated, Gary then moves left again, causing secondary contact. With Art Pal and Gary spinning and Jimmy and Ray unable to avoid making contact from behind, Gary cannot wait because he has crashed himself. It should be noted that the driver that reported this to the stewards did not ask for a penalty to be applied. However, the stewards can still award a penalty if they see something they don't like. In this instance, it is felt a penalty is necessary because a second driver affected in this incident messaged the admins as well. That was SRI. And Gary was already warned at the previous race about moving across the track into other cars and how this will annoy other drivers. The steward's verdict then is a stage 2 penalty to Gary for causing a collision by lack of awareness, which is minus 3 points. And as we just previously mentioned, Gary did receive a penalty from the previous. It was just a warning to him and Art Pal about not moving across into each other or into anybody. You can't just move across the track when there's a car there, and that. Word to each of the drivers has been taken into consideration here, and it is one of the reasons why as the stewards we feel that this does deserve a penalty, but as was mentioned there, we do want to highlight the fact that although Art Pal has brought this to our attention, it wasn't to get Gary a penalty, it was just for Gary's awareness. However, as stewards we feel, after having been given a warning about it already, this now deserves a penalty, and we'll have a look at the footage to show you exactly what was going on. So as we look from spectate view, and we do see this on the race footage as well, which is quite interesting. We see the drivers going into the corner before the banking, a little touch from Art Pal, Rich going a little bit wide, Jason in the middle, Bob in the middle. We see Art Pal gets up the inside there, and then they're 3 wide. This was kind of what we see on the race footage, but I know at the time I wasn't really looking. I just saw cars spinning and then a few more cars off the track. So from that view you can't really see a lot. Now, with it being Gary that got the penalty, we'll have a look at Gary's on board first. You can see he does get a little nudge here from Art Pal, just there. Gary's able to get around the corner, giving Bob plenty of space, and looking at maybe slipstreaming. There's a little bit of contact there, and then there's the secondary move, and then there's the bit that spins, which then collects Jimmy and SRI as well. Gary here does try to get going. Unfortunately, it's very hard to do that with the banking. You're much better off letting go and reversing, and that's exactly what Gary does. Okay, so we'll have another look at Bob here then. So Bob was in the middle of this in the end. So at the moment, him and Art Pal sort of side by side. You'll see that touch from Art Pal on Gary again. Bob not going for the move on Jason. Now Bob gets up the inside of Gary here. Art Pal gets up the inside of both of them, and then this all happens very, very quickly. And then there's the 2 cars spinning. Now, for me, there's nothing Bob could do here to avoid that. I mean, some may say, well, he could have backed out. He shouldn't have to, and that's a big point. Now, yes, there was a little bit of contact between Art Pal and Gary there. Art Pal did back off at that, which now maybe puts him into this position. But once he's there alongside, which he gets there fairly and is deserving of the space, Bob's trying to give him the space but can't. Now, we are going to have a look at this in a little bit of slow motion in a moment. Might be this view, it might be the other view. I'm not exactly sure, we'll find out. So here comes Art Pal and here comes Gary. So at this point, all 3 drivers are side by side, and all 3 need to try giving each other room. Unfortunately, Bob in the middle gets squeezed a bit, and the 2 on the outside disappear. So for Bob, this is brilliant. But for Gary, unfortunately, as we see here, there are 3 wide. And this is where there's an initial bit of contact where Gary's just coming down the banking a little bit. So there's a little bit of contact there. And then Gary's car goes up the road again. So that little bit of contact there, we're not fussed about. That can happen. But it's this bit. I don't know if Gary's trying to follow Rich or what, I don't know. But Gary moves back down the banking. Unfortunately, there's 2 cars there, both of which are deserving of space. Now, because Gary has moved across the road into other cars, this is where it comes into connection with the warning from last week, that Gary has moved across the road, which has put one car into another, causing that car to spin, and then causing himself to spin, and then collecting other cars as well. Now, some may say, well, why's Gary got a penalty? Because he ended up behind Art Pal anyway. Well, this has been a feature in DGT for a long time, that you cause a collision, you wait for the person, and you deal with it on the track. But if you're in a situation like Gary was here, where once you've got control of your car again and you're getting ready to go, you're already behind the person, that doesn't mean that you have served your penalty of self-penalising yourself to wait for them. So in certain circumstances, a penalty could still be applied, and this is one of those circumstances. So Gary, if you're frustrated with this one, or perhaps at the time if you thought that you were the victim, I can kind of understand that, but at the same time, from looking at the footage, Artpal did get his car up the inside fairly. Bob gave Artpal just enough room, and unfortunately it was Gary's car moving down towards the left that did result in the killer contact there. Okay, that's that one down. Still got a few more to go, so let's kick on. G5 Apple's Outburst. Okay, so this was actually brought to us by Artpal. It says 2035, I'll hold my hands up. I had an outburst during the race that I wasn't given space. I was coming from off the track, and I was frustrated as I felt I wasn't given in space on corner entry, which is what pushed me wide. But I might have just got to Jason as he was trying to brake and keep control of his car by straightening up his tyres. So Artpal sort of, saying I'm holding my hands up, I had an outburst during the race. And we'll have a look at it in a sec. So from the steward's perspective, Artpal moves to the outside of Jason as the cars start braking for turn 1. Artpal moves left and Jason drifts right, with the two cars making minor contact. Although this results in Artpal going off track, the stewards believe Artpal braked very late and may not have made the corner regardless. Artpal does not return to track unsafely, it's just unlucky that Rich outbrakes himself and runs wide into Artpal. It should be noted that Artpal apologised to Rich for his outburst afterwards. For the steward's verdict, no further action. So just to touch on that, Jason and Artpal coming together sort of around turn 1. We'll see that in a moment. Artpal does end up off the track. The way that Artpal returns to the track is absolutely fine. It's just very unfortunate that at that same time Rich Blues has got himself a little deep in the corner, got himself a little wide, and there's a little bit of contact. So let's go and have a look at all of this then. So on the spectate view, we can see that we've got Jason here with Artpal right behind him, and then we've got Bob, and then Rich, Gary, and Jimmy, I think it is. So Artpal slipstreaming and then pulls out to take the wider entry into turn 1, and this is where the two lines merge. There's a little contact there, and we see Artpal go wide. And from this view, it kind of looks a bit bad on Rich, but it's not until you actually see the other camera angles of exactly what happened. So Artpal taking the wider line, coming in, Jason on that tighter line, they meet, Artpal ends up off the track. Artpal returns to the track, he's not full throttle, he's controlled on the throttle, and he's not just winging the steering back into the middle of the road. For Rich, he's just unlucky here. Positions himself nicely, but just a little too late on the brakes, goes deep, a bit of contact with Artpal. Rich, as you can see, doesn't make the corner anyway. So it's just massively unfortunate that Rich and Artpal came together there. Artpal apologising for his outburst, and it has to be commended. Artpal did personally message Rich Blues to apologise for his outburst at the time. Okay, let's move on to the next one. G6 bobbing for apples. Okay, so this was again brought to us by Artpal. 3947, reporting myself. I went in the Bob, and I think he lost the place because of it. Well, Bob didn't scream, so clearly he didn't feel it. And we'll see what the stewards say about it, though. So the stewards' view, Artpal is on the outside, approaching the chicane, with Bob and Gary to his left. Jimmy then moves up the inside to make it 4 wide, and in brackets here it's what the fuck. With Gary opting to back out and drop behind, well done Gary for this by the way, Artpal then turns across for the corner and doesn't leave enough space for Bob, who still has Jimmy on his inside. While Bob does lose a position to Jimmy, we don't think this warrants a penalty to Artpal, who reported himself for this after all. While Jimmy didn't do anything wrong in terms of the DGT rules, the stewards felt that him making it 4 wide and not backing out before the corner, despite being on a tight line, wasn't a wise thing to do. The steward's verdict is no penalty, but a reminder to all drivers about spatial awareness and not trying silly moves. And regarding the what the fuck bit earlier, I promise you, when each one of us stewards, admins, watched the footage of this, there was one point where we all went, "What the fuck? No, don't do that, don't, don't, oh no." And I guess we'll get to see that now. Okay, so we're looking at the spectate view here. We see Jason running away, and we've got Gary and Art Pal side by side. No problem with that. Here comes Bob. Is he going to give a bump draft to Gary? No, he's going to go 3 wide. Okay, interesting. Here comes Jimmy. Is he going to give a bump draft to Bob? No, he's going to make it 4 wide, and Jason's going to share a bit of slipstream, and we don't really see from this angle much of what goes on, to be honest. It's not until we really look at the other angles we can look at it in detail. So let's do that, shall we? So first of all, we're going to go on with Gary here, because fair play to Gary. Lovely bit of racing between Art Pal and Gary through the left-hander there and onto the bank. Everything here between these two is fine. I mean, you could say Art Pal, if he'd have ducked in behind Gary, could have bump drafted Gary up to Jason. Who knows? But these two, they're side by side a bit, no problem. Giving each other room. Here comes Bob. Could have bump draft Gary there, chose to overtake instead. Or has he? Because he's not got enough speed to overtake. And here comes Jimmy. He's going for the overtake, but he hasn't got enough speed either. Now we're 4 wide, and this is where, fair play to Gary, he backs out of this. And yeah, I want to say, the steward said it, I'll say well done to Gary for backing out of that one. If he hadn't have done, God knows what could have happened. But should he have been the one to back out? Well, let's see. From Art Pal here, Art Pal's kind of got Jason's slipstream side by side with Gary and Bob, and Art Pal sort of staying to the right here. But when it comes down into the braking zone and then turn in, he does turn in as if he thinks there may only be 1 car or no cars next to him. So not the greatest of turn-ins from Bob's view. See, now this is where I would say this is interesting to begin with, because if I'm Bob, the best thing to do here is bump draft one of the cars ahead. If I do that, me and that car pass the other one, and possibly even catch up to Jason. So if I bump draft Gary now, we both benefit. But going for the move, knowing what we know now with the boost as well, excuse me, Bob's got up alongside, can't go anywhere. Here comes Jimmy. Here's Jimmy. And Jimmy's now up alongside. Excuse me. And yeah, we don't like the fact that Jimmy has made that 4 wide there, I'll be honest with you. We're looking at it from Jimmy here. Now, this is interesting as well, because Bob could bump draft Gary. Jimmy's going to catch these guys quite a bit quicker because he's got the boost here. But as we now know from the boost, once he gets to these guys, that's going to disappear. So he's got overspeed, should bump draft. He's gone to the inside to make the move, but he hasn't got the speed now. Now he's in this position, really, Jimmy should back out of this big time. He was the last one to the party. He's on the tightest line. He's put his car in a position we really don't want to be seeing people putting their cars in. Making it 4 wide there is not clever. Making it 3 wide isn't great, to be honest, either. Now, as we look at this, we can see Art Pal's got a bit of space to Gary. But yeah, there's not a lot that Gary can do here. But for Art Pal, as we get towards the turning point, you'll see this is on slow motion. He started turning in now. He's not going fully for the curb as if there's no one there, but he is turning in as if he thinks there may only be 1 car next to him, being Bob. But unfortunately for Art Pal, there is another car there, and that's Jimmy. The only thing is, we're of the impression really Jimmy should not be putting his car there. So there is a little contact between Art Pal and Bob here, because Bob can't move any further left, and some would say he doesn't have to move any further left. So a little more awareness from Art Pal, and to be honest, from Jimmy, please don't do this. And this is to everybody actually. In this kind of situation, there's no point going 4 wide. You're not going to go anywhere. But if Bob would have bump draft Gary, or Jimmy bump drafted any one of them, they could have had a massive benefit here. I mean, Jimmy coming in with this speed as well, If he goes up behind, let's say, Bob now and bump drafts him, they both get past Gary and Artpal. And if he bump drafts either one of Gary or Artpal, they both get past the others. Working together a bit would help them massively here. So this is for, again, like, we don't like seeing them go full wide, but it's also for the awareness. Knowing what we know now with the boost, the 3 cars ahead aren't getting boost anymore. Jimmy's caught up with the boost. Now Jimmy's not getting boost. So although he's going, think he may have the extra speed, I can go for this. As soon as he gets up alongside, there's no more boost. There's no more extra speed. He's not going to be getting ahead before the corner. And all he's done, unfortunately, is put himself in not really a no-win situation where as this gap closes, he can't really go left. And Bob's trying to give him the space, but Bob's got Artpal coming over to the left. So, yeah, as stewards, we can't put all the blame on Artpal there. We can't put all the blame on Jimmy there. What we would say is, in a scenario like that, with a little bit of change in thought process about the driving, that situation doesn't occur and you can actually have better racing. Because again, if either one of those 4 drivers bump drafted the other 2 cars behind don't get up alongside. They also may be able to catch up a bit to Jason and get into his slipstream, and once you get into his slipstream, maybe you could battle him and be that lead car in that pack. But by going Bob 3 wide, I mean, this one, Bob's gone for it. Could have realised at least halfway down the straight, crap, okay, this isn't working, and backed out of it and gone for a faster exit through the chicane. Or realised, shit, I should have done the bump draft. And Jimmy, the same thing. If they'd gone for the bump draft, it would have been a much different scenario. So for this one, guys, no penalties on this occasion, but let's try and be more aware. And also, I mean, especially on a circuit like this with massive long bendy straights, but big slipstream opportunities, if you bump draft someone, you will go so much faster than if you're side by side with someone. And remember what we know about the boost now as well, that we saw there Bob, Gary and Artpal, none of them were able to catch Jason. They were out of his slipstream, but close enough that they were no longer getting the boost. Okay, because I think with the slipstream that only works from like within 0.7 of a second. The boost kicks off when it gets to 1 second. So we end up with Bob, Artpal and Gary, all 3 who have no boost once they're side by side. Jimmy still has boost, but with that extra overspeed, he's able to close the gap, get alongside. Now doesn't have any of the boost, does he? Something to think about. Okay, one more to go. The next one is a long one, I think in a way important for everybody. So let's not hang about. Let's crack on. G7 Cotton Rod's Corners. Okay, so this one has been brought to our attention by Steve F1, saying, Connor, with multiple ETLs at the bus stop chicane, can the stewards review? Okay, this one's going to get long. It's going to get busy. But keep me cool. Okay, so the steward's view. From reviewing Connor's race, the stewards noted that he went off track at the chicane on 14 of the 18 laps. So it seemed it was more his normal line than simply due to mistakes, and made no attempt to slow down at any point. Possibly Connor was not aware of what the track limits were at that corner, but had the track limit setting been turned on, the game would have given Connor multiple penalties during the race. Of the 14 ETLs, 7 were marginal, where it might not have been obvious from Connor's driving view that he'd gone off track. However, the other 7 were way off track, and enough for the stewards to award a penalty. So the steward's verdict on this is that there's a stage 2 penalty to Connor, for not respecting and or not being aware of track limits. So it's a -3 point penalty. I'm going to expand on some of the information there in a moment, but there is some additional information that was mentioned earlier, and we'll get to that now. So additionally, the stewards noted from reviewing several drivers' footage from the race that the driving views they use may give a misleading perspective on where the edge of their car is. In certain instances, it may appear to a driver that they have just stayed within track limits when in fact they are well outside of them. So it's something we wanted to make all the drivers aware of for future races. Now, before we get into looking at the details of this, I want to give you some extra information. Because one of the things we like to try and do on the Stewards Report is keep things as short and sweet as possible, which hasn't been that possible this week. But anyway, in a situation like this, there is a protocol that the stewards go through. So, for example, Steve F1 brought it to the steward's attention that Conrad may have exceeded track limits, and can we have a look at that? Now, in respect to that, as the stewards, we would only look at those laps that are around where Steve F1 is around Conrad. So when Conrad's right behind him, and when Conrad passes him, and when Conrad is ahead and within his view, because that's what Steve F1 is seeing at the time. And we've always said that we never want people to sit there looking through people's footage going, oh, he's cut corner, and then reporting every single one. We don't want that. But in a situation like this where a driver has been asked or has asked for us to look at the driver's ETLs that they were seeing at the time on the track, we look into those. We look at whether they were off track. That's obviously a key point. And as an additional bit of information with that, we need to know whether they are attempting to improve their line, whether they are making an effort to stay on the track. And one way that we do that is we can go and look through the driver, how that driver goes through that corner throughout the race. And for example, if it turns out that they like for example with Dave the Harp, with the first incident we dealt with on here, with Dave the Harp, as I mentioned, he only went off track once, maybe twice. So for all of his laps, he was perfectly on the track, no problem. So he's had one, maybe two tiny little errors. So in that situation, had there been no overtake, or no getting alongside, there would have been no penalty, quite simply because it was a 1-off from Dave, and a 2-off might not be too bad, or a 3-off or a 4-off. But if we happen to see that a driver has gone off a lot and doesn't seem to be making the necessary adjustments to try and stay on the track, that's when, as admins, we can go, right, the report wasn't about these laps, but in getting our evidence, we're able to see that either the previous laps are absolutely fine or the previous laps are a problem for us. So, I mean, imagine trying to have this written down in the steward's report. This is why I personally like the G-Spot. Because it can be explained a little bit more in detail, and we can show the footage. So unfortunately for Connor, he has got a penalty here because there are enough laps prior to those that were seen by Steve F1 the admins have seen and gone, yeah, that's a bit too many, and he should be doing better. We are also fully aware that it is possible that for some of those off-track moments, he may have had no idea he'd gone off the track, and that's where some people may go, well, if he had no idea, how could you expect him to rectify his racing line and the way he's taking the corner? Some would say, it doesn't fucking matter if he didn't know. The fact of the matter is, they're off the track. So there is a few different ways it can be viewed, and this is where, as admins, this can cause us issues in terms of what our own personal perspective or view of it is, how strong a stance we have on it, how other people may view it, and this is where exceeding track limits and us having to deal with it brings in one hell of a load of headaches, because not only do we have to obviously go through all the information, but we then also have to deal with the aftermath of that information. And we also, as mentioned earlier, makes us think, well, would we have been better keeping the track limit penalties on? Because if that was the case, Connor would have known on his first one and would have been making an effort to change the line. And same for anybody else who may have had a small cut and not known about it. The game would have told you about it and you could have made adjustments. So there's a lot of conversations that come off the back of that, and a lot of, to be honest, a lot of headaches for the admin. So what I will say here is, Connor, if you're frustrated about this, we get it, understand, but at the same time, look at it from our point of view. There's enough laps in there that we can sort of go, oh, naughty boy. And I'm going to be honest now, and this is not a dig at Connor or anything like that. I just want to be perfectly transparent with what we have looked at. We are going to have a look at Connor's corners at the chicane. We're going to look at every lap, because it tells the whole picture. And like I say, this is not us picking on Connor, it's us being able to show the whole picture to everybody. Okay, so that everybody can learn from it, we can learn from it, it benefits us all. There's also going to be footage of other people in there as well. Okay, so once again, nobody's being singled out. Understand if anyone's pissed about getting a penalty, but remember, we don't want to give people penalties. We don't like having to go through these kind of process, not this in depth anyway, not with ETLs, because for some of us admins, we've been there, done it before, and it's taken us down a route we do not want to go down, because it's not a nice place to go. And I can understand some of you may not understand that, but when we were admins of a Formula 1 racing league, track limits did become a massive topic, and it came with a massive workload, and it's one that we don't really well, let's put it this way. I know for myself, dealing with the track limits this week has taken me to a place I don't really want to go to again, and that could be said the same for SGP and SRI. I don't know what Steve F1's history is with dealing with ETLs, but as I'm sure you can imagine, this has created quite a workload for us, and with the emotional dealings with it as well. It can take its toll, and one of the things that we want to do is to try and keep things simple and keep things fun. So yeah, now I've waffled on loads here, but I mean, I can only hope that it allows you to appreciate just how much we do actually feel about what happens, and the things that we do that we do have to deal with. So okay, we're going to get onto some footage now. So I'm going to stop waffling. We're going to focus on what's been happening, and we'll crack on, shall we? So, do you want to play a game? Oh, all right. No. Okay. Well, if you don't play, but just for the sake of it, play along with the game, because we're going to play a little game as we get into this footage. So join me for a game of cut or no cut. Okay, so we're on board with Jason here, and we're going to go through the chicane, and what I'm going to want you to do is to have a guess at whether the exit of the chicane here is a cut or no cut. So this bit coming up, was it cut or no cut? Well, as we get closer and closer to it, you can make up your mind and see if you were right because as we'll see from this view, it was a cut. Now from the T-cam view, it looked very close. It looked like it may not have been. Okay, so we're going to do another one now. So cut or no cut? Get your guesses in quickly, because we're about to get there in slow motion. So cut or no cut? It doesn't really look like it could be a cut, does it? But it is, by a mile. It's quite a long way off. And as we mentioned earlier with Dave about that yellow curb, if you're over the white line before the yellow curb, you're exceeding track limits. Now that's two situations there with Jason, and I've picked Jason because he's normally a very consistent driver, and they were literally the only two times he went off track there. And from that particular view, or even from front bumper view, you may have had zero knowledge that he'd gone off the track, but he did go off the track. So if track limit penalties were on, he'd have got a penalty for the first one and would have known to adjust for the next one. But he probably didn't know that he'd cut the first one, and probably didn't know he needed to make an adjustment for the next one. Okay, now we're going to get into the footage regarding Conrad. And remember, Connor, this isn't a dig at you or anything like that. This is for everybody's benefit. Okay, so we're behind Steve F1 here, who is behind Conrad. So this is where I just want to sort of show, this is what Steve F1 would have been seeing with Connor. So like, okay, cut there. Steve may have even cut it himself. Okay, so the next lap, this is what Steve's seen. Okay, Connor's gone very, very wide. However, on this occasion, I mean, Connor doesn't really gain anything. Steve F1 actually does manage to close the gap. And even gets to a point of being able to do a bit of a bump draft. So if you just looked at those two, you could go, okay, there's maybe not much in that first one. The second one, okay, he's gone wide, but Steve has gained on him, so Connor's lost out a bit. But then the next lap we look, and Connor's just off track again. So, okay, so well, that's 3 out of 3 now. And then on the final lap, that looked like it could have been quite a bit of a cut there. So we're looking now of those on board with Connor. So this was from lap 15, where now from this angle you should be able to tell, yeah, unfortunately he's cut the corner. So as we take a quick look around, he is over the white line, he's off the track, he's before the yellow curb, so he is exceeding track limits. The next lap around, this is where he went very wide, so clearly he's gone off track, he's had a moment. Now he does stay full throttle through the corner, but this one again, this one is quite close. It's one of those, like, was it, wasn't it? When you have a look at it in a bit more detail, it's like, okay, so from the driver's perspective, you might not know you've cut it, but you have cut it. Again, that's the 3 out of 3. And now for the fourth one that looked like it could have been close, which is the last lap. Again, okay, so it's a very similar one where, yeah, so from driver's perspective, may not have realised, but from Steve F1's view, it looked like it was, and from there, it looked like it was. So for Steve F1 bringing that to the admin's attention, or the steward's attention, sorry, in a way is the right thing to do, because if Connor didn't know that he was exceeding track limits, now he knows that he was exceeding track limits. And this again is where, as admins, we would go, okay, well, was it the norm or was it not? Like, what were the other laps like of his? Because if it was just those as an anomaly, could that change whatever thought process there might be about what it is going forward? So that brings all those different things into play. So we're going to have a look at a little bit more footage now of, I think this is going to be Steve F1. Okay, so this is Steve F1 when he's actually ahead of Conrad on lap 14, where Steve makes a mistake, goes deep, he's off throttle, he's back on the throttle, and he does go off the throttle again. He's making sure he's gained no advantage from going off the track, and during that, Conrad manages to pass him now. And here's one with SGP. SGP's off throttle, look, he's trying hard to stay on the road, and he's slowing down, couldn't stay on the road, but he's making an effort to stay on the road. So they're examples of things that we would look for a driver that's making the effort to try and stay on the track. So when we look through Conrad's footage, we'll be looking for, okay, is he attempting to keep slowing the car down and then going off the track, or does he not go off track at all? And if he does go off track, is he then trying to rectify it on the next lap? And this is the reason why I want to show all of the clips of this, because that way we're not sort of hiding anything. You'll be able to see for yourselves what it is that we've seen. And again, Connor, this isn't a dig at you. We're using this for the benefit of everybody, okay? Right, let's get into the rest of the footage then. Okay, we're going to start on lap 2 here. And I'm using this view initially to show sort of like he may not have known that this was a cut. And that was a cut. I am going to slow this one down actually as well. So we started at lap 2 because lap 1 there was a whole lot going on. So lap 2 may not have known he'd gone off. This is one of those marginal ones where he may not have known he'd gone off. Lap 3, I think this one, he's clearly on. The white line's halfway under the car, so nothing wrong there. Lap 4, again, there's potentially another one of those marginal ones where from on board you may not have realised you cut the corner, but from off board it's clear the corner's been cut. Lap 5, bit wide, big cut, but there was no effort really to try and stay on the road. There was no slowing down of the car, like we saw with SGP and Steve F1. It was almost like, oh, I've gone wide and stayed flat out. Now, with this one, Conrad did actually gain on me, and I actually called him out for this one actually during the race, but he obviously didn't hear it until afterwards. And he has gained on me, however, he does bump draft me. Now, I don't know if he knew he'd cut the corner or not, but he doesn't attempt an overtake on me. So we're going to lap 6 then, and okay, we can see clearly that's off the track. Lap 7, similar thing. No slowing down of the car to try and keep it on the road though. It's flat out on the throttle. So now we've got 3 in a row that are pretty much the same, and now 4, and it doesn't look like the effort is being made to rectify that. Lap 10 does it properly, no problem. Lap 11 looks like he does it properly. So now there is a change, and then we've got another track limit there and another one there. So now we've got quite a few of them that are off track. This is where Steve F1 went wide. Connor clearly stays on the road, makes the move, 0 problems with that. Then we're into lap 15, and these were those ones where that one looked marginal. This one's clearly off. He doesn't gain from this one. 17, again, is marginal, but he is off the track. And then there was 18 where, again, it looked like it would have been marginal, but unfortunately he was off the track. So as we've looked at that footage, we've looked at it, and unfortunately, as we've mentioned, Conrad's off the track 14 times out of the 18 laps, which is too many. It's too many for us as admins to just do nothing about it. And of those 14, there are a handful of them that Conrad probably had no idea he'd cut the corner, so didn't know that he needed to adjust his line. And I know I argued this as like, how can you expect someone to adjust their line if they don't know they've done wrong? And as I've said, the other view on that is it doesn't matter if they know or not, they're off the track. It's irrelevant. But what we all sort of agreed on was that there was enough laps there where Connor was a long way off the track, where it seemed like he wasn't making anywhere near enough effort to stay on the track. And we didn't feel that was right. We saw the example of where Connor did go deep and Steve F1 caught up to him and bump drafted him. Now this is where we get into the more emotional or the more vague side of things when it comes to stewarding, is that in that scenario it's easy to go, well, Conrad didn't gain anything in that situation, so it shouldn't really be a penalty for that, which then could lead some people to think, well, those 4 that we saw in a row, maybe he didn't gain anything there either. Well, that is a situation where us as admins or as stewards, we don't want to have to sit there trying to look at the finest detail, the finest thousandths of a second to work out if somebody got an advantage or what is an advantage, or dealing with different perspectives of what is an advantage or isn't. Like, did he not lose as much as he should have done is another argument that some people would say. What we say is that not enough effort was being made to rectify that line. So even if on that one occasion where Steve F1 was behind him, it would appear that Conrad didn't gain anything in that scenario, it doesn't mean that it was okay, because of the prior times that line had been taken and hadn't been rectified enough. And it'd be the same regardless of which driver it is, even if it was me. But again, because of all the different thought process and vagueness and what is advantage, what isn't advantage, and all the different depths that you could go to with regarding track limits, it's a route, as I've mentioned before, we don't really want to go down. Do we want people being able to abuse track limits? No. Are we saying Conrad's abused track limits? No. Are we saying he's been off track? Yes. Are we saying other people have been off track? Yes. It can happen. But would we be better off letting the game deal with that and deal with any awkwardness that that could bring, which would be the likes of getting a penalty for going off track because you've been hit there, and those kind of scenarios? Is that a lesser of two evils for us as admins to deal with? That's something that we have to sort of work out for ourselves, as what are we willing to do. And as I've already mentioned, for some of us, going deep down this route of exceeding track limits is not a route that I don't think any of us want to go down. But at the same time, we don't want people just like taking the piss with track limits. So what do we do? That's obviously one of the things that we have to work out. Now, yeah, I mean, I could sit here talking about this for a long time, but to be fair, as admins, we've talked about it quite a lot over the last few days. I mean, there's some things, for example, that the admins would perhaps like to clamp down on, like we'd really like to see people not going 4 wide, because we know it's probably just going to bring trouble. We know that people can make a genuine mistake and cause carnage. There's a big difference between somebody doing something stupid and causing carnage, or doing something stupid and having no effect. Doesn't mean it isn't stupid, but there's a big difference between a genuine fuck up compared to putting yourself in a position you shouldn't really go into. So there are big differences, and the more we can reduce the small things that we all can avoid doing, the better things will be, the easier things will be. And interestingly, me and Ray did say on commentary before the Dirty Championships that the racing had been so good that we'll probably curse it and things will go bad. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that things are going bad, but dealing with ETLs is definitely it brings back bad memories for some of us. So yeah. Now, with that, what I would like to say to the drivers is, I mean, at least as far as I'm concerned, and I mean, the other admins may have their own personal opinions of it, and if Ray was here, he'd give you his opinions of it, and the only reason he's not here is just the timing of everything, is that if it means on GT7, it takes us changing a few things, even in the middle of seasons, thinking that we may have changed a rule or changed a situation for the better or for the right reasons, and it turns out actually that was a mistake. bear with us, because one thing that none of us admins thought of when we took the track limits penalty system off, let's put it this way, we all 100% agreed that taking it off was the right thing to do. In hindsight now, 2 races later, we are now 100% agreed that we're not sure. Because none of us foresaw the situation we've just had with Dave probably having no idea he's cut a corner and making a pass to win a race. Conrad with a few excursions to the level it was. None of us were expecting that to anywhere near that degree. Had we factored that in before we changed, would we have done things differently? Would we have not taken the penalties off? I don't know. But if we turn around and feel that it was a mistake to turn it off, and what we thought was the lesser of two evils actually is the more evil of the two, and we decide to change it back, then I would hope the drivers can appreciate that it's more than just us laying the law. There's more to it than that. It does take have an effect on our emotion, our mental state, and things like that. And that's something I don't know if people perhaps understand, that every time we do give somebody a penalty, it does affect us mentally. We don't I know we say it a lot, we don't like giving people penalties. We really don't. But what some people may not realise is just what the mental effect is on us to give you penalties, especially when we're friends and we like you. I mean, if we didn't like you, we wouldn't give a shit. But the fact is we do. So when we give out penalties, it kind of hurts. It hurts us to give you penalties, and it hurts us if we take the time to go through all of the stuff that we do, and then someone just sees that they've got a penalty and perhaps loses the temper and says some stuff. It hurts. It has an effect. And yeah, I mean, if that's something that you perhaps hadn't thought of before, or realised before, I mean, I'm bringing it to your attention now. It does have an effect on us because we do care. And sometimes we do look at stuff and think, what the fuck are they doing? And then sometimes we look at stuff and go, yeah, I did worse than that. I'm stupid. We all make mistakes. We all know shit can happen. But yeah, I don't want to sound like I'm playing a broken violin, but I suppose I'm just going into a bit more detail than usual about stuff like that, and it does like I say, it does have an effect. And to be fair, this is what happens when I'm on my own and I can just talk. I mean, the G-Spot finished 20 minutes ago. I've been waffling, but this is the thing, it matters to us. It really does. We want to just come on, have fun, and we want everything to be fair as well. So how can we make it fair and fun and enjoyable? But also, if people do happen to do stuff that they shouldn't do, even if they didn't realise they'd done it, can we still give them penalties? Well, if we don't, would it stop? Probably not. Don't know. But sometimes things happen that are worthy of penalties. And yeah, sometimes things aren't worthy of penalties, but there we go. But again, with the ETL stuff, there's too much grey area of what's gaining an advantage, what isn't gaining an advantage, and all things like that. But let's put it this way, if we do happen to change back to having the penalties on for corner cuts, there are still potential difficulties with that. The main one being, if we turn the penalties back on and somebody gets hit through a corner and receives the penalty, what should we then have in place for that scenario? And one one way to look at it is to go, okay, if you hit somebody off track and they get a penalty for going off track, then when they serve their penalty, you should be behind them once they've served it. Okay, it's simple enough. However, what if it turns out that you weren't the reason for them getting their penalty? Okay, now we're into another grey area. Well, what if the penalty given is too close to the penalty line for it to be served that lap? One answer could be, well, when the driver serves the penalty that they didn't deserve, you must still be behind them once their penalty has been served, and if that means it's a lap later, then it's a lap later. Tough shit, you shouldn't have hit them. But then is that too harsh? I don't know. But also, what happens if in that scenario something else happens to that driver? They go and cut a corner on their own and get another penalty, or they get crashed into by somebody else and get spun around. Should you still have to wait for them then if they've got extra penalties? Well, that don't sound fair. Maybe if that scenario occurred, you could just drive off and keep going, because you've done your bit, right? You're waiting for them to serve the penalty that you've given them. Somebody else comes along and gets involved and crashes them out. It could be said, well, you've done your bit. You were serving your sentence, and somebody else came along and dealt with a new one. There is other factors there. The only thing we kind of have got is that dealing with our ETLs is something we have now had to properly deal with, and it has brought up a lot of stuff for us personally. And the hypotheticals that we're talking about are exactly that, hypotheticals. Although in the second race of this championship there was a couple of reports of I was hit off and I got a penalty for it, but when we actually looked into the details of those two incidents, the penalties weren't given because the driver had been hit off the track. The penalties were given because those drivers had gone off the track, and there was a lot of other things going on at the time, but it was because those two drivers were off the track, not because they were put off the track. So there are grey areas there, but again, that's a situation we haven't experienced yet. So what do we do? What's the best way? Do we just go with some of our gut feelings? Do we just give it a try and see what happens? Do we change nothing and see if ETLs are still a problem? Not always as straightforward as you think. Okay, right, well, I've waffled loads here, so the only thing I can say is hopefully everybody can understand, even if you may not accept what is shown on the video here, hopefully you can all at least understand why things have been given or not given. And also, again, it's not a dig at anybody directly or personally or anything like that. And once again, if we didn't care, it wouldn't hurt us when we give you penalties. It's a bit like, do you not remember being a young kid and being a naughty boy, and when the parents get the belt or the slipper and they're smacking you on the arse and they're giving, this hurts me just as much as it hurts you? I now understand what they meant, because at the time you're thinking, no, fuck, it doesn't. But actually it does. It wasn't a physical pain, it was up in the head. I understand that now. Okay. Right, now on that bombshell, have a good one, everybody. Take care. Like, subscribe, notifications bell, blah, blah, blah. Hopefully the race video is available. We'll have a good one and see you all soon. Bye.